sometimes don't even care. It can have all the errors it wants. Okay, so we are and tonight while we're in here, there'll be about 80 guys studying in the jail tonight.
Really?
They study every night. They study and then they pray together and they try to sleep. So it just blows me away how God is doing his thing no matter where we are. Mm-hmm. He's just turning away. Yeah. Pretty great. All right, so we got to chapter 3 in Isaiah, and we're not going to look at all of these passages, or not every verse. We'll look at every section, but I do want to try to get to chapter 6 if we can tonight. Chapter 5 is a little involved. Chapter 3 if you recall, in the minor prophets that we've already looked at, there's always they go through and they bring condemnation. Okay, there's condemnation for the leaders that are supposed to be leading. They don't lead. They're abusive, and so he condemns them. There's condemnation for the religious leaders and the spiritual leaders because they're there for a particular purpose, but they're not performing any of those things. Then there's condemnation because there's no sense of justice. So justice and righteousness, whenever you read the prophets, you're going to find those themes travel together. And then Isaiah does this beautiful job of attaching God's holiness to justice and righteousness, so that we're left without excuse. There's no excuse for ever treating anyone or doing anything unjustly because it totally offends the holiness of God. So it is as purposeful a sin as anything that you might else name that you may offend God through the Ten Commandments, let's say, which are micro-stated issues of justice and integrity and righteousness, just stated in specific form. He's doing the same thing here. In chapter 3, he's going through and he's dealing with the leadership problem. And part of the problem is they're full of themselves. They think they're heroes. They think they're younger than they are, that they can just do kind of anything they want. It's kind of out of control. The elders are depending upon divination and other gods rather than God. Just everything is moving away from God's intention and away from Him. Ultimately, He's at the center of His intentions. So, in verse 4 of chapter 3, he says, "I will make use their leaders and unstable rulers will govern them." That means what's going to happen is inexperience is going to rule the day. Everyone that I've put in place that should by now have been mature in their relationship to me, they're not. So I'm going to make the worst possible arrangement of circumstances. So there's going to be unstable people that are in charge. Oh man, it sounds crazy, but it sounds like us. A lot of this stuff sounds just like us. When you start reading it, people will oppress one another, man against man, neighbor against neighbor. The young will act arrogantly toward the old. I get this amazing, and when I read that, I'm thinking about this idea that they want to do away with health care for anybody over 75 years old. Just make them comfortable so they can pass away in whatever infirmity that they, So I'm thinking of all this stuff that's current event, and it's the same thing that God said He's going to cause to happen to His people because they've chosen to walk another way. So in this verse 6, he says, "You have a cloak, you be our leader. If you've got a nice coat, we don't mind. You just lead us." So everything's shallow. resting on the surface. I don't want to go through all of these. Verse 9, the look on their faces testifies against them, and like Sodom, they flaunt their sin. They do not conceal it. Woe to them, for they have brought disaster on themselves. We're going to get into another series of woes in chapter 5 that really bring all of this stuff together. So we know what happened in Sodom, and he's saying the same thing here. Sin against God is a normal day of everyday life. That's what life was. So that's what God is having to deal with. Let's see. Youth oppress my people, or the young oppress my people, and women rule over them. So this is the idea here. And I thought this was interesting. That who raises the children? In this day, the women were raising the children in regards to what was good and right and true, what they should value, what they should accomplish in life. So the mothers, the women, instilled these values. The men in their life would teach them how to exercise those values. So one would be kind of a theoretical. That's what the women are doing. And then the very practical, the men would teach them. He's saying that the women have done a terrible job. They've lapsed in their job to bring up leaders, to bring up their children to be good leaders. They've confused you. And I thought again of today.
Does sound like the
what a confused world we live in, and especially our young people, our 20-somethings and below. Really, the ground is just moving under their feet all the time, and we've done that to them. I mean, you're not born. They're not born this way. We had to do it to them. So this is what he's pointing out, and God is saying, "I'm taking credit for this calamity that's on you." So are we to pause and humble ourselves enough to say, God is bringing these things about so that we will awaken our hearts to Him again? See, it's just something to think about. I mean, this definitely was happening contemporarily within their lives, but it certainly does speak, I think, to us.
Absolutely. History repeating itself.
Yeah.
Because that's what mankind does over and over.
Right.
It's
That's
just repeatedly wanders, comes back and wanders.
Yeah. So wasn't Jesus supposed to break that cycle?
Mm-hmm.
And so He does that within the remnant of the church.
That's right.
Yeah.
We have the constant guidance of the Holy Spirit to keep us
That's right.
on track. Those that do not have the Holy Spirit are the ones that are on shifting ground at all times and teaching their children.
And so much of what that is, Jesus described as being a light on the hill. Mm-hmm. If that's the life you're living, it's going to be the illuminating light of the world. And so maybe that's where we've turned down the wattage some in the church. We're not as bright a light in the world anymore. Maybe as we used to be. We've kind of gotten, we're kind of like in this little section that'll come up. Maybe we've become more like these religious leaders, where we're kind of going along to get along. Every church, in our case, every local congregation has to truly, constantly evaluate where we are, so that we're being fidelitous to what God has called us to, and not deviate from that.
Well, even inside the covenant, the new covenant of Christ, God still rolls through these things and has constantly, from what we see in the Old Testament and in the total history, where it's been a matter of, God's people mess up, God creates a situation where it brings them back to Him until they mess up again, and then God brings a situation where it brings them back to Him. So here we are in this situation here, where there is a lot of ungodliness going on in this world right now. okay? Not just in the people, but in the leaders who follow these people.
Right.
I mean, that the people follow. And whether you want to believe it or not, this trend isn't going to stop. There's going to be something that's going to bring the people back to realize how much they need God.
And
God's going to force it on them. There's no way around it. I don't think there's any way around it.
I think that's the job of the church. I think that's where we are. I think that's where we are to be more aggressive with the gospel than we are presently being. Because the world has no clue really what this is all about, because they're too quick to speak against what they know nothing of. Okay? The surest way to know that someone is doesn't know something about a thing is to fear that thing. Right? The more you know about it, the less fearful it is. And we haven't made ourselves known, I don't think, in a way that that is able to change the course. But it's never too late. With the Spirit as our guide and our Lord as our companion that never leaves us or fails us, it's never too late. And I think that will be the great day when when you look back in history, especially in our history in our country, there were 2 and possibly 3 periods in time where there was a great awakening amongst people, where they began again to seek out and search God, but it didn't happen automatically. There was life in the church that burst through like a lighthouse, and people were hungry and they wanted it. And I think that's what we're looking for today, really, is just an awakening of and maybe the church has to awaken first before we can do our job. Anyway, he goes on in 16. He's kind of down on the women here. Because the daughters of Zion are haughty, Amos called them cows in the northern kingdom. Because the daughters of are haughty, walking with heads held high and seductive eyes, prancing along, jingling their ankle bracelets, the Lord will put scabs on the heads of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will shave their foreheads bare. And then he goes through this little thing again. It's not good. So we just talked about how the women and the mothers were the foundation for teaching what was valuable, teaching integrity. And what he's describing here is they are concerned with everything else under the sun but that. And that's part of the problem. Instead of perfume, there will be stench. Instead of a belt, a rope. Instead of beautifully styled hair, baldness. One of the things that the Babylonians were known for was they would brand the men and shave the heads of the women. That's how you knew that you'd been defeated in battle. Okay? So that's what he's describing here. Instead of having a nice belt, they're going to have ropes tied around them, leading them into exile, bald-headed. Okay? Totally humiliated was the whole point. Your men will fall by the sword, your warriors in battle. Then her gates full of men in mourn, deserted, she will sit on the ground. So he's personified all of this as the city of Zion, or the city of David, Jerusalem. It says, on that day, we're not going to read through the whole, chapter 4 is very short. On that day, he says, 7 women will seize one man, saying, we will eat our own bread and provide our own clothing. Just let us bear your name. So this is take away our disgrace. So what's going to happen here is there's going to be so few men that women aren't going to be able to have children and pass along any name. And that was part of the blessing. If you recall, God said that he was going to make a great nation through these people. Well, how do you do that? How do you? And there's already been a promise that this is going to come from the seed of David. How do you do that if you're not bearing children? So there was a period of time, extra biblical information. There was like for every one man there was 11 childbearing women. Okay, which is a recipe for extinction. See, can't. So that was part of the problem. So it says on that day, this is kind of the oasis in the middle of all of this. We get this in chapter 4, and then chapter 5 quickly goes back to condemnation, and then we get to the call of Isaiah. So this is familiar, what we've already heard in chapter 1, and we heard also in Micah, and was repeated in a more shallow way in Amos. But it says in Hosea. But it says, on that day, the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land will be the pride and glory of Israel's survivors. Whoever remains in Zion and whoever is left in Jerusalem will be called holy, all in Jerusalem, written in the book of life, when the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and cleansed the blood guilt from the heart of Jerusalem by a spirit of judgment and a spirit of burning. I'll take a little breath right there. Okay, so what he's saying here, the day is coming when God is going to restore, and he's going to do it through a cleansing of judgment. Who else brought the same message in Jesus' day? And that would be John the Baptist. And some of this sounds familiar to John, right? He's going to cleanse you with water and with fire. Okay? So this is kind of where John's looking to. The nation that Jesus came into was not unlike the nation that Isaiah was prophesying to. And so he says here that the way all of this is going to come about, it's not going to be exactly the way that Hosea described it in the north, where he says, well, how can I let Ephraim go? I got to have him back. Okay, he describes it in that language, but he also deals with the judgment a little more softly, because these people were already on their way out the door. Okay, so there was a need for compassion from Hosea that Isaiah is not quite ready to offer. That'll be in the middle section of the book. But here he's saying that all of this will be washed away. He will cleanse the blood guilt from their heart of Jerusalem by a spirit of judgment and spirit of burning. Then the Lord will create a cloud of smoke by day and a glowing flame of fire by night over the entire site of Mount Zion and over all the assemblies. So what do we identify with the cloud of smoke and the pillar of fire?
Moses.
Yeah, God leading his people, protecting his people in the wilderness, see? So what he's promising here is, I'm going to restore a relationship here where I'm going to be present, and I'm going to guide you, and I'm going to protect you. For there will be a canopy over all the glory, and there will be a shelter for shade and from heat by day, and a refuge and shelter from storm and rain. So this is kind of akin to Micah saying that everyone's going to have their own vine and their own fig tree, and there's going to be peace. And that's what Isaiah is describing here, much like he did in chapter 1, but in a different way here. Chapter 1, make sure I get the pad done. Let's see. So I don't say the wrong thing here. Where is it? Oh, here we are. No, it's in chapter 2. I'm sorry. See, I was saying the wrong thing. Beginning with verse 3. So he says that there in a more messianic tone, okay, because in messianic language, everything is restored with no need for God to correct any longer. It's what we look to as heaven, and we're already beginning that We live in the Messianic age today. It's already begun, but it's not yet fulfilled completely. So what he's describing in 2 is this Messianic type of fulfillment. What he's describing in 4 is the way that we get there through the judgment that God prevails upon his people because of their sin. All right, we receive the accomplishment of that judgment through Christ because Christ is judged for our sin. Had God judged us in our sin, we would have died. Mm-hmm. But he chose for us to live. So he places all of that upon his Son, who is raised out of the grave from those things. And then our life becomes enmeshed his. We're clothed in Christ. We're one in Christ. We have the mind of Christ. All these different ways of describing what God has done in that through faith. All right. So that's the reason why I go through all of that. It's not the exact same message, but one is a underlining or mitigating factor that moves us to the other. So this particular passage, man, especially these first 4 or 5 verses, are just beautiful. The way that this is structured and the way that it's done is not done anywhere else in the Old Testament or the New. It's just poetic genius when you read it in the Hebrew, which I'll say it 1,000 times. I sure wish I could, so you can hear it. But you can go, and I'll have to, maybe next week I'll bring the website and put it on the screen so y'all can write it down, or maybe I can send it to you. But there's a website you can go to and listen to all of you can listen to the Hebrew Bible read. And you won't understand the word they're saying, but in passages like this, you'll begin to get the sing-song nature of it. And how, yeah, it's just crazy good.
I have a friend at work. She's Jewish, and she speaks the.
Yeah.
Am I saying it right? She speaks the whole language, and I asked her to recite John 3:16. I could not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's hard enough to read. I could never. I tried to learn it.
And get the sound.
But you can't speak what you can't read.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah. Getting C's and D's didn't quite cut it for learning how to do all that. But I was just glad to get that at the end of it all. I do know how to look up words, though. That's very helpful. So he says, I will sing about the one I love. It just sounds like a good song already, don't it? I will sing about the one I love. A song about my loved one's vineyard. The one I love had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. So this is well, let me kind of get it from. This is God speaking of.
This is God talking or Isaiah talking?
No, this is God speaking about the one that he loves, and this one that he loves has this vineyard. So you can equate that the ones that he loves is the people, okay, and the people are to produce this out of this vineyard that it has. So he's singing about the loved one's vineyard. The one I love had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He broke up the soil, cleared it of stones, and planted it in the finest vines. He built a tower in it, and in the middle of it, this is God doing all this. And he even dug out a wine press there. So everything you needed was there to protect to grow the vine, to protect it from raiders that would try to come in and take it. And you could also produce wine, all in this one place. So it had everything it needed. He expected it to yield good grapes. And then, dun dun dun, but it yielded worthless grapes. So this is God speaking to this, and it all sounds wonderful till you get to the last line. He said, I did all of this and for nothing. It's just like you can hear the air let out of the whole thing. I was looking for good grapes, and it yielded.
You didn't do it.
Yeah, yielded worthless grapes. So, what does he do? What do you do with an entire vineyard that is producing worthlessness rather than
Destroy it.
yeah. So now, residents of Jerusalem and men of Judah, you go from this picture of a vineyard into the court. We're back in court again, like we were in the first and second chapters. So now, residents of Jerusalem and men of Judah, please judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done for my vineyard than I did? He's done everything possible for it to produce good, but it produced worthless. Why, when I expected a yield of good grapes, did it yield worthless grapes? So he's asking the people to answer for themselves. I did all of this for you. Why have you produced worthlessness before me? Now I will tell you what I'm about to do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it will be consumed. I will tear down its wall, and it will be trampled. I will make it a wasteland. It will not be pruned or weeded. Thorns and briars will grow up. I will also give orders to the clouds that rain should not fall on it. So all at once, we're let in on the secret that I shared earlier and that you figured out on your own, that this is God speaking. Who else controls the rain but God? Okay, so this is God speaking of his people. For the vineyard of the Lord of armies is the house of Israel. So now there was the parable. Now we're getting the explanation for the parable. And the men of Judah, the plant he delighted in. He expected justice, but saw injustice. He expected righteousness, but he heard cries of despair. So God always gives us a peek into his heart. And we find over and over in these prophecies that what God values so much when he created man to fill the earth and subdue the earth was that they behaved right before him and they behaved right with one another. It was supposed to be that kind of life. And then, of course, we're not 3 steps out of the garden and Cain kills Abel. And then we go a chapter and a half deep and we find that Cain's offspring is bragging about the thousands that he's killed. And it just becomes this snowball effect that you just can't get a hold of until Noah. And he wipes that out. And then he's going to start all over with Abraham and goes through that whole thing and brings finally to this point, and we're right back where they were. It's just, like you said, it's a constant cycle. In the book of Judges, they could cycle through in 20 or 30 years, but in all of human history, if it takes hundreds of years, it's still going to wind back at the same place and in the same way. So he goes through and he denounces their sins here, 8 through 15, I think. No, it goes all the way through to 17. He's talking about how they've blocked off the land in the cities. There's no place for people to live. All the land has been used up. Let's see, where do we see that? In verse 9 and 10, it's saying that you got a 10-acre vineyard and it doesn't hardly produce anything. You get 10 acres, which should yield 10 bushels, you're getting 1. They're just everything about the way they live is uncooperative, even with the land. Okay. Woe to those who rise early in the morning in pursuit of beer. So what's he talking about here? Woe to those who what's on their mind is their own personal pleasures. So the first thing they wake up doing is wanting to drink. Okay. Just no way to live. Woe to those who linger into the evening and flame with wine. So what's he talking about? They drink all day. Why does a person do that?
Miserable.
To be numb to life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the life that they've made for themselves is not even the life that brings them satisfaction.
Right.
They're just numb. They're just numb to it. At their feasts, they have a lyre, harp, tambourine, flute, and wine. They do not perceive the Lord's actions, and they do not see the work of his hands. So there were festivals all through the year. I think we talked about this in here. I forget, but 7 of them. And they were all meant to celebrate what God had done either for his people in the wilderness or for the crops that he'd given them. You know, just like we do. You know, we have watermelon festivals and all that stuff. We're celebrating those things, but God did them for the purpose of them remembering that, hey, God's here and he does all this for us. They weren't doing any of that. It all had taken on sacrilegious reason, and sacrilegious air about it. So he said, therefore, the people will go into exile because they lack knowledge. Her dignitaries are starving, and her masses are parched with thirst. What he means by this is, when he talks about dignitaries, he says that they're going to go into exile because there's no wisdom in these people at all. There's no wisdom to lead. They are starving to know good things, but they can't anymore. Their lives have become dull to it. Therefore, Sheol enlarges its throat and opens wide its enormous jaws. So, a picture this past week, or a video actually, somebody had put a GoPro on a fishing line and they had caught a fish. They were reeling it in. They were filming it, and man, all of a sudden here comes a shark and it swallows the fish that they were reeling in. Yeah, and you can see it coming. It was this big old shark, and he swallowed that sucker up. And when I was reading this earlier, I said, you know, Sheol's got his mouth wide open, ready to swallow up. But Sheol was a place of the dead, and so what he's describing here, these listless people who have no meaning for living, they're drinking themselves into a stupor to escape the life that they've made. At the end of it all, the place of the dead is just ready to receive them all. And nobody wanted to go there. I mean, we all knew that they were going, but the way that you went was with dignity, right before God. All of this was valuable even in death. So you didn't just ignore, you toss all that out because, like Epicurean, eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow you're going to die. That's not how they lived their lives. They wanted to go out with some integrity, but not these folks. She was just waiting for them. Humanity is brought low, each person is humbled, and haughty eyes are humbled, but the Lord of armies is exalted by his justice, and the holy God demonstrates his holiness through his righteousness. Lambs will graze as if in their own pastures, and resident aliens will eat among the ruins of the rich. So what he's saying here, and here's this little flash of hope that's thrown in here. The Lord of hosts, or the Lord of armies, is he's going to have his just day, and it's going to be good. It's going to be good for people when his justice is finally exercised and realized. Lambs will graze like they're at home. That means no fear. Everything's there. The aliens that will be there, the nation's going to be wiped out. People will come in and they'll literally get rich off of the ruins of those that were removed. Because it's kind of like the parable that Jesus offers about offering the feast, and he sends his servants out, and they've all got excuses. Oh, I got to go look at this piece of land, or oh, I got to do this. And they come back and say, hey, nobody wants to come to your feast. And he gets upset. And he says, well, go into the highways and the byways and bring those people in. So they go out and a few come, and there's still room. And he says, and go in the highways and the byways and the hedges, because I want my house to be full. I've done this for a reason. And one of the reasons is I want my people with me. Same, kind of the same thing here. Doesn't matter who's going to be there, but God's house is going to be full. Woe to those who drag iniquity with cords of deceit. So he's talking about these that are going into exile. Their sin, they're going to be dragging like luggage with a rope behind them. They just got to drag that stuff around to pull their sin along with cart ropes. To those who say, let him hurry up and do his work quickly so we can see it, or let the plan of the Holy One of Israel take place so that we can know it. He's saying to those people, he's saying this very sarcastically. That's what people were saying. if God's going to do all this, let's see his hand. Let's see what's going to happen. But that's part of the woe. Woe to those people who are saying that, because it's coming. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who consider themselves wise and judge themselves clever. All these woes. Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine, who are champions at pouring beer, who acquit the guilty of a bribe and deprive the innocent of justice. So all of these things that he's describing here. That's your life that I'm talking about, and it's going to bring you destruction. Therefore, as a tongue of fire consumes straw, and dry grass shrivels in the flame, so the roots will become like something rotten, and their blossoms will blow away like dust. For they have rejected the instruction of the Lord of armies. They have despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Therefore the Lord's anger burned against his people. He raised his hand against them and struck them. The mountains quaked, and their corpses were like garbage in the street. And all this, his anger has not turned away, and his hand is still raised to strike. So, nothing hopeful in those passages. Just kind of laying it out there. And it says this is a signal flare to the rest of the world. Okay, nobody gets to gloat over what's happening to Israel, is what this passage is about. This doesn't mean that God's love is, that he's abandoned his love for these people. It means that he's having to deal with them this way in order to save them. So he's saying to these other nations, you don't gloat. It says he raises a signal flag for the distant nations and whistles for them from the ends of the earth. Look how quickly and swiftly they come. None of them grows weary or stumbles, nor one slumbers or sleeps. No belt is loose, no sandal strap broken. The arrows are sharpened, and all the bows strung. Their horses' hooves are like flint, their chariot wheels. This is what he's describing about the nations that are going to come and trample in the worst way.
Like
the nation.
Going on dead.
What's that?
It's like he's wiped them all out, and the vultures are coming in.
Yeah, I mean, corpses are laying in the street, and just a whole graphic illustration of how bad it's going to be, which should lead us all to understand and know that God takes very serious his holiness, and quite often we just don't take it as serious as we should. It seems to be an out of touch thing for so many of us. That's why the church is so important to each one of our lives. To maintain a sense of holiness happens when we're together. Part of what happened for these people, the way that how they lost their sense of holiness, is when they separated. It's when the nation divided, and the temple was in one part of the nation, and you had 10 tribes that were in another part, and with a very corrupt and self-serving leader. Instead of trying to even reestablish temple worship, he established idol worship, and that was the end. But how different might it have been if they were together? So we must remain vigilant together. We have to look past the things that might divide us, because Jesus said it before Abraham Lincoln: a house divided cannot stand. There's no way.
Well, Satan knew he had to divide Eve from Adam in order for her to fall.
Yeah.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah. Yep. And then brother next, and the list goes on and on. So, and then when we look, you get all the way to chapter 21 in Revelation, and finally it is all united again. Even heaven and earth, even God and his people, everything's united again. And everything in between is about the struggle of establishing that and maintaining it, because it's not easy. Yeah. So, and I posted a thing on Facebook this week about there is an atheist movement in the country that is now no longer fringe; it's organized, and it intends to come at the church. And right now the church is fighting amongst itself and divided. And if we don't again remember what we've been taught in Scripture and look at our history, we will falter and fail as this very potent force moves forward, because it has a doctrine. It's science for the most part. It has for lack of a better word, a theology. It has a word about what it believes, and it is a convincing word for a lot of people. But Jesus said that the church prevails against these things if we will indeed prevail. Yeah.
The thing about that is, I hear people at work and just people that come through the store, and they're so quick to believe that because it's like you can touch it almost. It's real. God, you can't put your hands on God. He's sitting right here, but you can't see him, you can't touch him. And people tend, it seems to me, to want something that's real and touchable, like a person.
See, the place where I divert from that is, I can't see it and hear it and touch it right here in this room.
Well, I agree.
When we live the life that we've been given to live, I think it is more tangible than trying to convince the world that the universe just came into being by some fractured whatever happened.
But remember now, some of these people don't have a glimpse into what we see amongst ourselves.
Yeah, that's right.
Like at work, I had a girl come to me, I told you that, and then I had another young girl come to me, and she says, you're just a little different than the rest of us. And you know what she told me, which I was happy about? She said, you really don't fit in anywhere. I said, well, this is true. I will tell you, this is true. I don't fit in. I don't fit in the cliques and the gossip and the go out and drink after work partiers. And she said, what's the deal, Miss Madison?
Yeah.
Oh, they don't have that.
So then you bring her here. You say,
Well,
look, it's not just me.
There's
a whole room full of us like that.
Way I am, and even better.
Yeah.
And then they say, do you let black people in your church? Well, how stupid is that? I guess there's some churches that don't.
We got a church in Greensburg that don't put a sign out.
That what?
What?
They doesn't have a sign out because they don't want
Black people?
black people there. Yeah, no, well, don't want.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Well, you got to remember.
Yeah.
You remember once upon a time when we lived up there? Yeah.
We had a fellow come here and speak in front of our men's group once, who said that he was going to start doing a credit check on people before they joined his church.
Yeah.
He actually said that.
There's I know a church in Pineville, Louisiana, that when you want to join the church, you bring your tax return to the pastor.
What?
You bring your tax return to the pastor first,
Yeah.
so he'll know what your tithe is going to be every month.
Oh, he's counting on it. He's deserving it.
So there's all kind of weird ways that people do church. I'm telling you.
You heard about that church in California. I don't know if it's true, but somebody asked me if I heard about it. When you tithe in that church, you have a chip.
Oh, I don't know about
and
that.
They just
I heard that.
they
But
stand
we're way off. We're way off base.
Yes, we are.
There is a right.
Sorry,
Yeah, there is a right way to do church,
That's
and
what?
Cattle.
and thank goodness we don't have to.
Well, it's just I don't know.
We don't have to guess about it.
Yeah,
It's pretty
you're right.
clear, and it is built on well, can't get out. Ephesians. Just read Ephesians
Yep.
once a week. It'll tell you what church is all about.
Yep.
So chapter 6, we're going to just touch on it here really quick, and then get back to it next week. So it says in the year that King Uzziah died. So now we were introduced in the first verse, the vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem that Isaiah son of Amos saw during the reigns of King Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and Judah. So now we are finding out that this, during the reigns of Uzziah, that Isaiah comes in right at the tail end. It's the year that he died, okay, when this happens. So we have the question, why is it, this is the second time we've come across this, really, third, because Amos and Isaiah and Hosea kind of let us in on, late in the book, why they were doing what they were doing, why they had been called to their ministry. So here we're 6 chapters in, and Isaiah is letting us know exactly how this happened. So you would think, the way that we think, is that, you'd find out about the person before you would find out about the message. So that the person gives credibility to the message. That's the way we think about things.
Mm-hmm.
But in this particular way of thinking, and in the way that they wrote, the message was what was important. You established the worth and the need of what was being said, and then you're introduced to the person that is saying it. Okay? So it keeps kind of a balance, or a weighted balance upon the word rather than on a person. We're so individualistic. We want to know about the person first
Right.
before they...
Yeah.
That's why when you go to hear somebody speak and there's a biography on the back of the program, there's not a synopsis of what they're going to say, which in this case, they would put the synopsis of what they're going to say, and you may not ever really find out about the person until maybe at the end of the talk. So that's kind of what this is. So we've been given this great introduction and what God is about, what's wrong with the people, what God is about doing for those people, some pretty good details about how he's going to handle the situation. And then in that middle part of chapter 3 and also in chapter 2, we get the great message of hope that comes out of all of this. Now we find out about Isaiah. It says that in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. So this is I love this picture, where he walks into the temple.
Picture, or is this figurative?
This is, he's in a moment with God.
Okay.
So not literal. This is his moment with God. It doesn't even say that he's in the temple, although we often identify him as being in the temple. It just says that he sees the hem of his robe filled the temple.
Mm-hmm.
So what Isaiah would have known about the temple was not be the Holy of Holies. He's not a priest. He would have never gone there. But he would have been able to know the holy place and the courtyard, which is a sizable area. And for the hem of the garment to fill it, and from top to bottom, wide, just the hem of it. So what he's describing here right away is just this sheer majesty of God, that he has filled the temple. And it says seraphim were standing above him. They each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew, and one called to the other, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of armies. His glory fills the whole earth. So this is the other picture that we get here. Okay, here's this. There's the all that Isaiah is able to see is what he's able to see with the hem, but he looks up, doesn't see God, but he sees above God, and there's these seraphim there. And their only function right now, 6 wings, they're not seeing, and they're not going anywhere. They're just hovering above God, waiting for orders, basically, and crying out, Holy, 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 Lord, we know it, Lord God Almighty.
That's the Revelation song.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
And this is where it's from. Yeah. And his glory fills the whole earth. So now Isaiah's vision of all of this has been revealed to him by these seraphim, that what he's experiencing in this little place in his life, God, is this glory that you're experiencing is everywhere. Okay? So it's like the veil has been peeled back, and in this other dimension of life, there's the glory of God. At least that's the way I experienced this in this. And then it says after that, The foundation of the doorway shook at the sounds of their voices, at the sound of their voices, and the temple was filled with smoke. So
God comes into the room.
was it? Yeah, comes in,
Mm-hmm.
and he settles in, just what he talked about earlier with the pillar of fire and the cloud of smoke. So God settles in with Isaiah here, okay, and like he does with Moses and like he did with Elijah, the ground shakes. There's no doubt that God is here with him. And what's the response?
You realize that he's unclean.
Yeah.
He has no business being there.
It's like for the first time in his life. This is what gets, you don't know who you are until you have that encounter with God. There's no way to know. Everything about life has lied to you. Everything about life has built this facade around you. And it's not until God settles in with all of his glory and this comes out of your mouth, says, woe is me. He's already pronounced this series of woes on the people. And now we should immediately recognize that Isaiah is tying himself to his own people. That he is not above any of this. He is not separate from it. The woes that he has spoken are the same woes for him. Now that's significant for more than just saying, oh, well, I'm just included because I'm one of the, I'm a sinner too. It goes beyond that here.
But he's also the messenger.
He's also the messenger.
So it is different for him.
Exactly.
Because
he has sense enough.
yeah.
In this next line, he says, woe is me, for I am ruined.
He's commissioned by God to deliver that message.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says, because I'm a man of unclean lips. I've described all of this as being true for my people, and I'm one of those people. And so this is a moment of confession that does not set him above. It practically sets him below what's going on in the nation, because he has the good sense to recognize what's going on, and they're not. They're ignoring
because
it.
He's delivering the message that they're going to be. They think they're all in great shape with God,
Right.
and then the whole time he's got to tell them,
That's right.
"So sorry, you're being destroyed." Yeah.
So what Jesus would say, to much is given, much is required. And now what has been given to Isaiah is a real understanding of who he is and who his people are, and also of who God is, because he says, I live among a people of unclean lips, and woe is me, because my eyes have seen the King. Yeah. Yeah. None of what I'm experiencing right now about myself, about the people, about the destruction that they are under, none of it would I know if God had not showed up and revealed himself to me. Nowhere in this do we understand that God revealed any of what he's going to do. We just know that God appears, and the brokenness and destructiveness of our life becomes clear. The contrast speaks volumes to the point to where he's ruined.
Isn't that the way it is though when we meet Jesus?
That's how it should be when we meet Jesus. That's right.
When you meet him and he reveals to you how lost and broken and doomed that you are without him.
I believe that's what Paul means when he says that we don't come to the. We get into this thing of election, and it's a thing. It's a real thing. But I think what it all comes to is that that Jesus appears to us, and everything about our life is revealed.
Mm-hmm. I was talking to a friend of mine about, people that I know that are lost and just refuse to, it refused to go there. And she said, Sharon, salvation is a two-part.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Before you can receive a Savior, you have to recognize that you need one.
That's right.
And she said when someone is face to face with Jesus and they refuse to see what he's revealing to them about themselves, then they don't recognize that they need a Savior.
That is exactly it. And Jesus does not withhold himself from not one person.
That's right.
And there are some in the world that believe that he may, but he doesn't. He approaches everyone, and they are left with the reality of, I'm going to accept the revelation that has been given to me about he and me, or I'm going to reject it. That's it. And there's not a thing a human being can do about it. If Jesus coming face to face with them cannot change who they are.
Or reveal to them that they need the change.
Yeah. Then,
or that they're in need of it.
Yeah. Then all we can do is pray. And we should do that. So then one of the seraphim flew. Okay? And in his hand, first time it's mentioned hands, by the way, but there's hands here with this seraphim.
That's true.
And in his hand was a glowing coal that he had taken from the altar with tongs. So altar fire was cleansing fire. That's why it was there, to make the sacrifice clean. So he would say, it touched my mouth. And with it, he touched my mouth with it and said, now that this has touched your lips, your iniquity is removed and your sin is atoned for. Okay. So he comes with this fire. We've already mentioned fire once before, right? Where he's going to come, he's going to cleanse with fire. And he does. So everything that Isaiah had experienced here as a matter of his own judgment. See, he was judged, but he didn't die. He speaks that judgment back to his people in the previous chapter, where he says, God is going to come and he's going to judge with fire, but you're not going to die. You're going to be made clean. And he had experienced this. He knew it was something he knew he could talk about. So God doesn't give us mystery to unfold. He gives us the reality of who he is to offer the people. So he says this. He says, your sin is atoned for. What does atonement mean in this case? Your sin has gone through the cleansing process. There's nothing there anymore. And what's not there, God does not remember. Realize that? Mm-hmm. So that's the other side of this. Once we go through this thing of atonement with Christ, those sins are not remembered. Even though we may have to go to him and ask for forgiveness of them on the cross, God dealt with them and he doesn't remember them. The Father is free from that. He sits in his rest. Remember, Hebrews talks much about God in his rest, because Christ is doing the work still until that day when he will finally lay it all at the Father's feet, and he too will take his place. Yeah, so all this kind of fits together. It's not a new message, it's just a more refined message. So then I heard the voice of the Lord asking, who will I send? Who will go for us? So in this moment, God he's inspired to ask a question. I've got people that need atonement. I've got people that need cleansing. And I need someone to go. So this has worked pretty good for Isaiah. This is how you can kind of think of this. Worked good for Isaiah. Maybe this will work for everyone. So that's the way that Isaiah is experiencing this. God wants to know who can go. And he's ready to go. He says, here am I, send me. We'll stop right there because we don't have enough time. Because now the message, we get I want to spend more time on the message than we have time to spend. Well, maybe not. Let's see. We can do it. The first little part here. Then he says, here am I, send me. And so God replied, go, say to these people, keep listening, but do not understand. Keep looking, but do not perceive. So what is God saying in this particular verse? Okay?
They would hear it, but they couldn't do it because their hearts were hardened.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Keep listening.
Yeah.
All right? Means that we're already getting the message.
Yeah.
Isaiah wasn't the first guy out of the chute. There's other prophets that have gone through word has slipped down. I mean, the northern kingdom's already on their way to Assyria, and so the prophecies of Amos and Micah and Hosea, they've all been spread around. They've been listening, but you don't understand what you're hearing. Because if you understood it, you'd act, right? Keep looking, but you're not perceiving a thing that's going on around you. Okay? So the inference there is, if I'm not with you, your senses betray you. You're dull. Does that kind of prove to be true a lot of times?
Mm-hmm.
If we let our senses take over and God's not there, that we kind of immediately slip into a bad place. And that's what God is basically saying here. All the right things are being said, but you don't have sense enough to understand it or to perceive any of it, because I'm not with you. Make the minds of these people dull, deafen their ears, and blind their eyes. Otherwise, they may see with their eyes and hear with their ears, understand with their minds, turn back and be healed. And you want to know who quotes that passage right there? Jesus does, when he's talking about the three soils. And
He's talking about the what?
the three soils, where he says, you got the rocky soil, and then you got the, and then finally the good soil. And Jesus quotes this in the middle of, I forget which gospel, because it's not the same in every one of them. But he quotes this in the midst of his instruction on that parable, saying that, if you would let me heal you like this, you can be the good soil. So Jesus is taking what Isaiah could not make, he could not make the people make sense of, and Jesus makes sense of it. If you will just give me your life and let me heal you, you can have the heart of fertile soil.
But like Isaiah, there would be, you got the whole nation that wouldn't listen, but there were people, Isaiah heard it and felt it. So God sent him with the, there would be a remnant.
Yeah, when we get into the middle part, we discover this great remnant theology that begins to come forth, that carries us all the way through, probably till today, if we really... Yeah. So God...
why send him if there wasn't going to be a remnant?
Right. Yeah. And as they're marching off to Babylon, there's a few things that be ringing in their ears. There's something to process along the way. And of course we get Jeremiah that saves the day for so many, that says, this is going to be a good thing if you will just do what God has been asking you to do for the last 200 something years, and that's seek him out. Yeah. And some of them do, but some of them don't. They never return. They've kind of lost themselves even in that. But some did, and that's all God needs is some.
Yeah.
And he can do a lot with some. Yeah. So then he says, "Until when, Lord?" So that's a good question. Am I going to do this? How long is this going to be where I have to deliver this kind of message? And then he tells him, until the cities lie in ruins without inhabitants, houses without people, and the land is ruined and desolate, and the Lord drives the people far away. So what he's talking about here is that until this exile thing is well underway and happened. It says, and the Lord drives the people far away and leaves great emptiness in the land. I think that's one of the most poetic ways of describing that. And I guess it's because of when I read this, I hear the shack in my ears, where he talks about the great sadness that comes upon him because he lost his child. And I hear this in this same thing, this great emptiness. And it's God experiencing the great emptiness, because he had chosen this land and he was going to fill it with people as number as the stars are in the sky and the sands on the sea, and they were going to be a blessing. And now it's just empty. And so God has to deal with that. God has to deal with that emptiness that's there, and He doesn't plan on that being the case forever. But it's encouraging. It's an encouraging thing to me to know that God works through this emptiness. That He finds purpose in it too. And in that moment of understanding that everything that was once filled is now empty, leaves you at a place of humility. Of course, God's not humbled by it. He knows what it can mean for His people. But He still experiences it like He experiences every loss of life. That is not with Him. Yeah. Though a tenth will remain in the land, it will be burned again. Like the terebinth and the oak, the leaves, a stump when felled, the holy seed is a stump. So He's just saying that there's nothing. There's just nothing left. And now that's kind of a hard place to come to, where nothing's left. But then we'll learn about another tree later, where things begin to come forth. And, all right. Hope that was handy tonight.
That was interesting.